Audrey held her silver fork tightly, her knuckles turning white against the polished metal. Across the long dining table, her father leaned forward with a smile that felt entirely forced, his eyes fixed on the man sitting at the head of the guest seating. The room was warm, filled with the rich scent of roasted meat and expensive wine, but a strange chill seemed to emanate from the other side of the room. Her sister, Lily, sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap like broken wings, her head bowed as the conversation drifted around her future. They were discussing a marriage that had been decided without a single question directed at the woman who would have to live it. Audrey felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, a stubborn refusal to remain silent while her sister was traded away like a piece of fine land. She caught her mother's warning glance from the end of the table, but she ignored it, deliberately pressing her fork against the porcelain plate until it made a sharp, clicking sound that broke the rhythm of her father's speech. Across from her sat Caspian, the ruler of the vast northern forests of Gale Valley, known to everyone simply as the Vampire King. His appearance was striking, with hair as white as fresh winter frost, and skin so pale it seemed to reflect the candlelight rather than absorb it. He sat with a graceful, unnerving stillness that made the humans in the room visibly uncomfortable, his dark eyes observing the room with cool precision. Beside him, his mother, Lady Eleanor, spoke in a low, measured voice about the suitability of the match and the long history of her family's influence in the region. She spoke of Lily as if she were a rare prize to be collected, a well-bred young woman who would bring grace to their isolated estate. Lily was 28 years old, beautiful and gentle, but she looked entirely defeated. Her face, a pale mask, hiding the sorrow she had carried ever since their father had forbidden her from seeing the man she actually loved. I believe a woman's highest calling is to secure her position through a proper match, her father said, his voice rich with satisfaction as he lifted his wine glass toward Caspian. Audrey set her fork down with a loud clatter that made her mother flinch. I think a woman's highest calling is whatever she decides it should be, Father, Audrey said slowly, her voice clear in the sudden silence of the room. Unless, of course, our guest believes we are completely incapable of making our own choices. The silence that followed her words was heavy enough to breathe. Her father's face flushed a deep red, and his grip tightened around his glass until his fingers shook with anger. Caspian turned his gaze toward her for the first time that evening, his dark eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed her face. He was 32 years old in appearance, carrying himself with an authority that felt incredibly old. Yet his features were sharp and entirely focused on her sudden defiance. I believe that duty and wisdom usually look like the same thing, Miss Audrey, Caspian said, his voice smooth and remarkably calm, breaking the tension without raising its tone. Your sister understands that some choices affect more than just one person. It is a sign of maturity to recognize when a family needs stability. The implication in his words was obvious to everyone at the table, suggesting that Audrey, at 26 years old, lacked both the maturity and the perspective to understand the world. Audrey met his gaze without looking away, refusing to be intimidated by his pale skin or his powerful standing. Then I am very fortunate, Audrey replied, reaching for her own glass with a steady hand, because maturity has also taught me to recognize when someone is being patronized. I seem to have learned that lesson quite early in life. Your Grace. Audrey, that is enough, her mother said, her voice sharp as a knife, as she tried to catch her daughter's eye. Her father quickly intervened, offering an apologetic smile to the white-haired king. Please forgive my younger daughter, Your Grace, he said, his voice tight with embarrassment. She has always been far too spirited for her own good. Caspian watched Audrey, a small movement at the corner of his lips, suggesting he found the situation more amusing than offensive. Spirited, Caspian repeated, testing the word as if it were something strange. Is that what we are calling it? Lily reached under the table, her hand finding Audrey's and squeezing it hard, her eyes pleading with her sister to stop before the argument ruined everything completely. Audrey swallowed her next remark, forcing herself to sit back against her chair, though her eyes remained fixed on the pale man across from her. Lady Eleanor cleared her throat, her expression turning practical as she looked at Lily. "Perhaps we should discuss the details of the next few weeks," she said smoothly. "Lily will come to our estate in Pinecrest for the next 2 months. A proper courtship period will allow them to find compatibility before we make any public announcement to the town." Lily's voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. "I would be grateful for that time, Lady Eleanor," she said, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "To know His Grace better before the wedding." Audrey leaned forward, unable to help herself. "Before you are legally bound to a stranger, you mean?" she added helpfully. Her father's fist struck the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "One more word, Audrey, and you will leave this room immediately," he shouted. "Perhaps that would be best," Caspian said mildly, his eyes never leaving Audrey's face. Miss Audrey clearly has very strong feelings about an arrangement that does not involve her. That casual dismissal, as if she were a child throwing a tantrum, snapped the last of Audrey's control. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "You are entirely right, Your Grace," she said, her posture straight and her hands trembling with rage. "It does not involve me. What matters to me is that my sister is being given no choice in a matter that will define her entire life. But I suppose, when you are accustomed to everyone bowing to you, the thoughts of a woman become rather unimportant." She did not wait for her father to dismiss her. Turning on her heel and walking out of the dining room into the cool night air. The garden was dark and quiet, the scent of pine trees helping to calm the anger burning in her chest. She walked down the stone path, blinking away tears of frustration. Lily was a good person, kind and selfless, and she was desperately in love with Owen, a local clerk who had nothing but a modest house and a true heart. Their father had forbidden the match because Owen offered no wealth or status to the family name, and now Lily was being handed over to a mysterious king who looked at people like a collector examining a new piece of art. Hearing footsteps on the gravel behind her, Audrey turned around to see Lily walking toward her, her light shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the cool Maine breeze. "I am sorry," Audrey said immediately, stepping forward to meet her. "I know I made it worse in there. I just could not sit there and listen to them trade you away." "I know," Lily said softly, taking Audrey's hands in her own. "Part of me was glad that someone finally said the truth out loud." Audrey looked at her sister's sad smile. "Then why are you going through with this? Father cannot actually force you to marry him if you refuse." Lily shook her head, her expression entirely hopeless. "What choice do I really have, Audrey? If I say no, Father will ruin Owen's business, and he will cast me out with nothing. Owen has his pride. He would never let me become a burden to him while he struggles to survive. This way Owen is safe." Audrey looked back toward the lit windows of the house. "So you will marry a vampire instead, just to keep everyone else safe?" Lily pulled her into a brief embrace. "He is not cruel, Audrey, just powerful and used to getting what he wants. I can endure it for 2 months." The journey to the Pinecrest estate took nearly 4 hours by open coach, the landscape changing from the coastal hills of their home to the dense, dark pine forests that marked the edge of Gale Valley. Audrey spent most of the ride watching the trees pass by, their thick branches blocking out most of the afternoon sun and creating a deep twilight along the dirt road. Lily sat opposite her, staring at her own hands, the quiet confidence she usually possessed replaced by a fragile stillness that worried Audrey more than any tears would have. The carriage finally turned through a set of massive iron gates, moving up a long, winding driveway that led to a grand mansion built from dark stone. The house was enormous, its rows of tall windows reflecting the gray sky, surrounded by perfectly kept lawns that suddenly gave way to the wild woods behind them. It was a beautiful place, but it felt isolated from the rest of the world, like a fortress hidden away from time. Lady Eleanor had traveled ahead of them and was already waiting on the wide stone steps of the mansion, with Caspian standing silently beside her. He wore a simple black coat that made his white hair and pale skin look even more distinct in the dim afternoon light. His hands folded behind his back as the carriage came to a halt. "Welcome to Pinecrest," Caspian said, stepping forward to offer his hand as Lily stepped down from the coach with practiced grace. "I trust your journey through the valley was comfortable." Lily offered a polite nod, her voice steady as she thanked him. Caspian then shifted his gaze to Audrey, his dark eyes turning amused as he reached out to assist her as well. "Miss Audrey," he murmured, his fingers remarkably cold against her skin, as he held her hand for a fraction longer than necessary. "How unexpected that you decided to accompany your sister." "My sister requested my presence, Your Grace," Audrey replied, stepping down onto the stone path and deliberately pulling her hand away from his cool grip. "I could hardly let her face this vast estate without some familiar company." Caspian inclined his head, a faint smile appearing on his pale face. "How completely devoted of you," he said, his tone low and difficult to read. "I do hope our quiet country life provides enough entertainment to keep you from becoming too spirited during your stay." Audrey met his eyes, refusing to back down from the challenge. "I am sure I will find plenty of things to occupy my time, Your Grace. I find that difficult situations often bring out my best qualities." Lady Eleanor cleared her throat, breaking the silent exchange between them. "Let us show our guests to their rooms, so they can refresh themselves before dinner," she said. The rooms they were given were large and connected by a heavy wooden door, allowing Audrey to walk straight into Lily's suite once the maids had finished unpacking their trunks. Lily was standing by the tall windows, looking out at the dense forest that bordered the eastern side of the property with a look of quiet longing. 2 months, Audrey said softly, crossing the room to stand beside her sister. "We will find a way to make this time matter, Lily." Lily turned around, her eyes bright with a sudden spark of energy. "Owen is staying with his uncle in a small cabin just 10 miles from the edge of this valley," she whispered, looking toward the closed door to ensure no servants were listening. "If I can just see him a few times, just to say a real goodbye, I can handle whatever comes after this." Audrey squeezed her sister's arm, nodding in agreement. "The king will want to spend time with you during the day, for walks or rides around the grounds," she said, keeping her voice low. "I will come along as your companion, and we will find a way for you to slip away into the woods while I keep him occupied." A sudden knock on the door interrupted them, and Hannah, a young maid with a quiet manner, stepped into the room with a brief curtsy. "Begging your pardon, ladies," the girl said, keeping her eyes lowered. "His Grace requests your presence in the main study at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He wishes to discuss the schedule for your stay." After the maid left, Audrey raised an eyebrow at her sister. "Requests," she remarked. "He certainly wastes no time in establishing his rules." The study was exactly what Audrey expected from a ruler who had lived for decades in isolation, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with heavy, leather-bound books and ancient maps of the valley. Caspian was standing by a massive desk near the window, a book open in his hands as the two sisters entered the room. He looked up, his dark eyes sweeping over Lily with polite approval before settling on Audrey with a much sharper intensity. "Thank you for joining me," he said, setting the book aside and motioning toward the 2 leather chairs across from him. "I thought it best that we establish some expectations for the coming weeks so that everyone is comfortable with the arrangement." They sat down, Lily keeping her posture perfect, while Audrey deliberately relaxed against the cushion, showing him she was not intimidated. "This arrangement was made by our families, but I have no desire to make your time here miserable, Miss Lily," Caspian began, his voice surprisingly gentle as he looked at her sister. "I propose we spend these 2 months becoming truly acquainted through daily rides and quiet conversations around the grounds. I want to know who you are, beyond the expectations of society." Lily blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting such consideration from the white-haired king. "That is very kind of you, Your Grace," she murmured. Caspian then turned his attention to Audrey, his expression shifting to something more challenging. "And you, Miss Audrey, will of course accompany us on these outings as your sister's companion, to ensure that everything remains entirely proper." Audrey smiled sweetly. "How thoughtful of you, Your Grace. You have found a perfect way to keep me close enough to watch me." The next morning brought a thick fog that rolled in from the northern mountains, wrapping the stone mansion in a gray shroud that made the surrounding forest look even more mysterious. Caspian had arranged for 3 horses to be brought to the front steps after breakfast. Choosing a gentle mare for Lily and a much more spirited animal for Audrey that seemed intended to test her riding skills. Audrey climbed into the saddle without hesitation, calming the horse with a firm hand before looking down at the king, who had already mounted a massive black horse. "Careful, Miss Audrey," Caspian said, his white hair contrasting sharply with his dark riding coat. "That horse has a strong will of its own, and does not like to be handled too tightly." Audrey adjusted her reins, keeping her voice calm. "Then she will appreciate my approach, Your Grace. I prefer to let things find their own balance." They rode out through the western gates of the estate, following a narrow dirt path that wound through the old pine trees before opening into a wide meadow that sloped down toward a quiet river. Caspian rode beside Lily, pointing out the different boundaries of the property and explaining how his family had protected these lands for generations. Lily listened politely, nodding at the appropriate moments, but Audrey noticed how her sister's gaze kept drifting toward the southern road, where the path led toward the outer valley. Caspian seemed to notice her distraction, softening his questions and keeping the pace slow and comfortable. "The river is fed by the mountain springs," he said, turning back to look at Audrey, who had fallen a few paces behind them. "The water remains cold even during the summer months, but it keeps the valley green." They reached a small stone structure near the water's edge, where Caspian dismounted and offered his hand to help Lily down from her horse. Audrey ignored his assistance, stepping down on her own and tying her horse to a nearby wooden post before joining them near the stone bench. "You possess a remarkable amount of independence, Miss Audrey," Caspian observed, his dark eyes watching her movements with quiet interest. "Is independence considered a fault in Gale Valley, Your Grace?" Audrey asked, crossing her arms as she looked out at the rushing river. "Not at all," Caspian replied, a faint smile appearing on his pale face. "But refusing help when it is offered can sometimes make a journey much more difficult than it needs to be." Audrey met his gaze. "Perhaps I am simply selective about whose help I choose to accept." The conversation remained polite for the next half hour, focusing on safe topics like books, music, and the upcoming social season in the town. Audrey watched her sister navigate the discussion with the skill of someone who had been raised to be a perfect daughter, but she could see the exhaustion hidden behind Lily's beautiful smile. Caspian was observant, his quiet nature allowing him to catch the small pauses before Lily answered his questions, though he chose not to press her for more than she was willing to give. "The local dressmaker will arrive at the mansion this afternoon," Caspian said as they prepared to return. "I have asked her to bring several selections of fabrics and designs for you both. Consider it a small welcome gift to make your stay more comfortable." "You are very generous, Your Grace," Lily said softly, her voice holding more genuine warmth this time. Caspian nodded, his eyes lingering on her face for a moment before shifting back to Audrey. "I am practical, Miss Lily," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "Comfortable guests are much less likely to cause disruptions during dinner, which I prefer to avoid." Audrey let out a small laugh, turning her horse back toward the path. "If you are expecting an apology for my behavior the other night, Your Grace, you will be waiting for a very long time," she said over her shoulder. Caspian rode up beside her, his white hair catching the faint sunlight breaking through the clouds. "I am not expecting an apology, Miss Audrey," he said quietly. "I am simply expecting you to remain consistent." The dressmaker's visit occupied the entire afternoon, turning Lily's large room into a chaotic sea of silks, wools, and laces. Lady Eleanor supervised the fittings with the focus of a general, selecting dark blues and soft grays that she insisted would suit the atmosphere of the Pinecrest estate perfectly. Audrey was forced to stand still for nearly 3 hours while 2 young assistants pinned and measured various morning dresses and riding habits she had no desire to own. By the time the servants carried the heavy trunks of fabric away, Audrey felt completely exhausted and walked back into her own room to find Lily waiting by the connecting door. "I managed to send a letter with the afternoon post," Lily whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. "Owen knows I am here, and he will be waiting near the old greenhouse at the edge of the woods tomorrow morning." The next day brought another gray morning, the perfect cover for their plan, as Caspian suggested a walk through the older gardens on the eastern side of the estate. The path was overgrown with ivy and wild ferns, leading away from the main house toward a dense section of pine trees where the old stone walls were beginning to crumble. Lily walked between them, carrying a small basket as if she were collecting wild flowers, but her movements were nervous and quick. As they rounded a sharp bend in the path that hid the mansion from view, Lily suddenly stopped, patting her pockets with a look of manufactured surprise. "Oh, I have left my handkerchief in the morning room," she said, looking directly at Audrey. "Audrey, would you mind terribly returning to the house to fetch it for me?" Audrey nodded immediately, playing her part in the deception. "Of course, Lily. I will be just a few minutes," she said, turning back toward the house without looking at Caspian. She walked slowly down the path, waiting near the stone archway for 15 minutes to give her sister enough time to slip into the woods where Owen was waiting. When she finally returned to the path, she found Caspian standing completely alone near a broken stone fountain, his hands folded behind his back as he looked toward the dense tree line. He did not look surprised to see her returning without her sister, his white hair catching the shadows of the overhanging branches. "Your sister has been gone for a long time just to look for wild flowers, Miss Audrey," he said quietly as she approached. Audrey stopped a few feet away from him, keeping her expression calm despite the sudden racing of her pulse. "Lily loves nature, Your Grace," she said carefully. She likely lost track of time among the trees. Caspian turned his pale face toward her, his dark eyes incredibly intense in the dim light of the forest. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this is a simple walk, Audrey," he said, his voice low and firm. "Your sister is meeting someone in those woods, and you are standing here acting as her shield. The only question is whether you will tell me the truth or force me to find out on my own." Audrey felt a wave of fear, realizing how dangerous the situation had become for both Lily and Owen. She took a deep breath, stepping closer to the pale king and looking directly into his eyes. "She is saying goodbye to the man she loves," Audrey said, her voice shaking slightly but remaining clear. "Our father refused to let them marry because Owen is a regular man with no wealth. She is going to marry you to save him from ruin, so please, just give her these few minutes to say a real goodbye. She has accepted her duty, but she deserves this small mercy." Caspian was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable as he studied her face. "You are risking a great deal to protect her deception, Audrey," he said softly. "I am being a sister," Audrey replied fiercely. "I care about her happiness more than propriety." Caspian looked down at his boots, then back up at Audrey's defiant face, a strange look passing through his dark eyes. "Your sister has 10 more minutes before I expect her to return to this path," he said, his voice entirely calm. "I suggest you wait near the edge of the woods to signal her when time is up." Audrey stared at him in complete shock, unable to believe that the powerful vampire king was allowing her sister to meet another man. "You are not going to tell our father?" she whispered. Caspian shook his head. "Forcing a woman into my home when her heart belongs to someone else is a foolish endeavor, Audrey. I am practical enough to recognize that. But from this moment on, I expect honesty from you about these meetings. I will not have a public scandal ruin our names because of carelessness." They stood in silence for the remaining minutes, the tension between them shifting from hostility to a strange, shared understanding. Lily emerged from the trees precisely on time, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright with tears, but she stopped in fear when she saw Caspian standing beside Audrey. "Did you find the flowers you were looking for, Miss Lily?" Caspian asked politely, his voice giving no hint of the conversation that had just occurred. Lily nodded quickly, glancing at Audrey in confusion. "Yes, Your Grace. The woods are very beautiful," she managed to say. "Excellent," Caspian replied, offering his arm to lead them back toward the stone mansion. "Let us return before the rain begins." Over the next 3 days, a strange routine established itself at the Pinecrest estate, turning their daily outings into a careful game of secrets. Caspian would suggest a ride or a walk through a distant part of the grounds, and Lily would always accept on the condition that Audrey joined them as her companion. Within the first 20 minutes of reaching their destination, Lily would invent a simple excuse to disappear into the trees, leaving Audrey alone with the white-haired king for hours at a time. Instead of the cold silence Audrey expected, they began to talk about things she never imagined discussing with a ruler. Caspian spoke about the heavy burden of managing the vast lands of Gale Valley and the endless expectations placed upon him by his people. You think this life is easy because everyone bows to my authority, Audrey? Caspian said one afternoon as they walked through the old apple orchard while Lily was away. But it is a cage of its own making. Every choice I make affects hundreds of families who depend on my protection. I cannot afford mistakes, and I certainly cannot afford the luxury of personal feelings or spontaneity. Audrey looked at his pale profile, feeling a sudden touch of sympathy for the isolation he lived in. That sounds like a very lonely way to exist, Your Grace, she said softly. Caspian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. It is lonely, he admitted, his voice dropping to a low whisper. But it is necessary for survival. You have the freedom to be spirited because no one else's survival depends on your choices. Audrey shook her head, refusing to let him justify his cold outlook completely. That does not make your choices right, Caspian, she said, using his name without thinking about his title. It just makes them easier for you to accept. You think love is a foolish distraction because it requires you to lose control, but control is not the same thing as living. Caspian watched her face, his dark eyes reflecting the green leaves above them. Perhaps you are right, he said quietly, reaching out to touch a low-hanging branch. Your sister is a wonderful woman who deserves a husband who looks at her with true affection. I never expected to love my wife, so it seemed unimportant whether she loved me. But listening to you makes me question that view. The following evening, Lady Eleanor hosted a small dinner party at the mansion, inviting several prominent families from the neighboring towns to meet the future queen of the valley. The long dining room was filled with the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses, with Lily sitting beside Caspian at the head of the table, playing her role with flawless politeness. Audrey sat near the middle of the table between a kind local doctor and a young landowner named Thomas, who seemed entirely captivated by her sharp wit and independent conversation. Audrey tried to focus on the people around her, but she constantly felt Caspian's dark gaze fixing on her from the end of the table, his white hair gleaming under the grand chandelier. During a pause in the general conversation, Caspian's voice carried clearly across the room, directing a question toward Audrey that drew everyone's attention to her. Miss Audrey believes that emotional restraint is overvalued by society, he said, a faint smile playing at his lips as he held his wineglass. I have been trying to convince her that some structure is necessary to keep the world running smoothly. Audrey met his eyes across the crowded table, refusing to be flustered by the sudden audience. I believe that feeling nothing at all is a far greater tragedy than dealing with the complications of real life, Your Grace, she replied smoothly. A life built entirely on structure is just a house with no one living inside it. The other guests laughed, assuming it was a friendly debate between the future brother-in-law and the spirited younger sister, but Audrey knew the words were part of a private argument that had been growing between them for days. After the dinner concluded and the guests moved into the drawing room for music, Audrey slipped away from the crowded space, needing a moment of quiet to clear her head. She walked into the dark conservatory at the back of the house, surrounded by tall ferns and the thick scent of blooming flowers under the glass ceiling. The moonlight washed over the room, creating long silver shadows on the stone floor as she leaned against a wooden railing, breathing in the cool air. She heard the door open quietly behind her and turned around to see Caspian entering the room, his pale skin making him look almost ethereal in the silver light of the moon. You disappeared very quickly from the party, Audrey, he said, walking slowly toward her until he was standing only a few inches away. I needed space from the performance, Audrey said, her heart beginning to beat faster against her ribs. And I needed space from you. Caspian did not move back, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. I cannot stop watching you, Audrey, he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he had spent years hiding. You have completely disrupted my control, and I do not know how to return to the way things were before you arrived. Audrey shook her head, backing up until her spine hit the wooden railing. You cannot say these things to me, Caspian. You are promised to my sister, and our families have already decided the future. Caspian reached out, his cool fingers gently touching the side of her face. sending a sudden wave of warmth through her despite his cold skin. "Your sister is in love with another man, and we both know this arrangement is nothing but a fiction," he said softly, leaning down toward her. "I do not want convenient anymore, Audrey. I want something real." Before Audrey could respond with another argument, Caspian leaned down and kissed her, his lips surprisingly warm and desperate against hers, shattering the last of her resistance. Audrey pushed herself away from him after a long moment, her breath coming in short gasps as reality returned with a terrifying force. "This cannot happen again, Caspian," she whispered, her hands shaking as she smoothed down her blue dress. "We are risking everything, and I will not betray my sister for my own feelings." Caspian watched her with a look of quiet sorrow, letting his hands fall back to his sides. "I understand," he said quietly. "We will maintain appearances for the remainder of the 2 months to protect Lily's secret. But I meant every word I said to you tonight, Audrey." Audrey turned and fled from the conservatory, running up the wide stone stairs to her room before her tears could fall. She threw herself onto her bed, burying her face in her hands as a deep sense of guilt washed over her. She had fallen in love with the white-haired king, the very man who was supposed to marry her sister and secure her family's future in the valley. A soft knock on the connecting door interrupted her thoughts, and Lily stepped into the room, her expression changing to one of deep concern when she saw Audrey's distressed face. "What happened down there, Audrey?" Lily asked, sitting beside her on the bed and taking her hands. "You look completely devastated. Did Caspian say something to hurt you?" Audrey looked at her sister, unable to keep the secret any longer. "I have done something terrible, Lily," she cried, her voice breaking as she confessed everything that had happened in the conservatory and the growing feelings she had tried to fight. Lily listened without a single word of anger, her expression shifting from surprise to a gentle, knowing smile that completely confused Audrey. "Oh, Audrey," Lily said softly, wiping away her sister's tears. "I am not angry with you at all. I have been so focused on my own love for Owen that I did not see what was happening right in front of me between you two." "But he is supposed to marry you," Audrey protested, looking at her sister in disbelief. Lily shook her head, squeezing Audrey's hands tightly. "He was never meant for me, Audrey. Our father chose a title, not a person. If Caspian loves you instead of me, it means we both have a chance to be truly free. He is a powerful king. If he tells our father that he prefers you, father cannot refuse him without causing a massive scandal. And if he releases me, I can finally return to Owen without destroying the family name. We could both have what we actually want." The hope in Lily's voice was infectious, but Audrey knew their father would not accept such a change without a massive struggle. "Father will never agree to let you marry a clerk while I take your place with the king," Audrey said, looking at the dark window. "He is too proud to change his plans so easily." Lily stood up, walking across the room with a sudden look of determination on her face. "Then we must find a way to make him agree," she said firmly. "We have nearly 2 months left before any public announcement must be made. Use this time to talk to Caspian, Audrey. Stop fighting what you feel, and let us figure out how to change our futures together." The next 3 weeks passed in a state of tense preparation, with Lady Eleanor unexpectedly joining their cause after catching Audrey and Caspian speaking privately in the library late one evening. Instead of becoming angry, the older woman confessed that she had noticed her son coming alive in ways he hadn't since he was a young man, and she refused to let him return to a cold existence of pure duty. "Your father is a very proud man, Miss Audrey," Lady Eleanor explained as they gathered in the study to plan their next move. "He will only accept this change if he believes it was the only honorable choice available to him. We must create a situation that forces his hand without ruining anyone's reputation." Lady Eleanor proposed hosting a large garden party at the Pinecrest estate, inviting prominent families from across the region, including Audrey's parents, who were eager to see the progress of the courtship. The plan was precise and required perfect timing from everyone involved. Lily and Owen would be discovered together in a secluded part of the grounds by Mr. Brow, Finch, and Caspian, creating a clear demonstration that Lily's heart belonged elsewhere. Caspian would then gallantly step aside to protect Lily's happiness, releasing her from the arrangement, and after a proper interval, he would openly declare his intention to court Audrey instead, turning a potential scandal into a romantic story of true love. Owen arrived at the estate 2 days before the party, staying secretly in a small cottage near the edge of the woods to avoid detection by the servants. Caspian met with him privately, ensuring the young clerk understood the risks involved and confirming that his intentions toward Lily were entirely honorable. "I am trusting you with her happiness, Mr. Owen," Caspian said firmly, his white hair gleaming in the dim light of the study. "If we are to go through with this deception, you must promise to protect her name for the rest of your life." Owen met the king's dark gaze with a steady nod. "I love her more than my own life, Your Grace. I will do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Audrey and Caspian were forced to maintain a painful distance during those final days, avoiding any private conversations or stolen glances that might raise suspicion among the arriving guests. Audrey's parents arrived in a grand carriage, her father looking around the massive stone mansion with a look of immense pride, entirely unaware of the rebellion being planned under its roof. "You must be very proud, Lily," her mother said during dinner on the first evening, looking at the elegant arrangements. "This estate is grander than anything we could have hoped for." Lily smiled politely, her eyes catching Audrey's across the long table, a shared look of nervous anticipation passing between the two sisters. The night of the garden party arrived with a clear, starlit sky, the expansive lawns illuminated by dozens of small lanterns hung from the old pine branches. The sound of music and conversation filled the air as guests wandered through the manicured pathways, enjoying the cool summer breeze that blew through the valley. Audrey stood near the edge of the terrace, her heart hammering against her chest as she watched Lily slip away toward the old stone arbor at the edge of the woods. Knowing that everything they had fought for was about to be decided in the next 15 minutes. Lady Eleanor played her part perfectly, guiding Mr. Finch and a small group of influential guests toward the eastern gardens under the pretense of showing them the rare night-blooming flowers that grew near the stone walls. Caspian walked beside her father, his expression perfectly calm and composed, though Audrey noticed his hands were clenched tightly behind his back. As the group rounded the final turn toward the arbor, the lanterns illuminated Lily standing in a close embrace with Owen, her face wet with real tears, as they played out their planned discovery for the crowd. Mr. Finch stopped dead in his tracks, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple as he witnessed his eldest daughter with the regular clerk he had banished from his home months ago. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared, stepping forward with his fists clenched. "How dare you touch my daughter in this house?" Lily and Owen stepped apart, Owen standing firmly in front of her sister to protect her from her father's wrath. "I love her, sir," Owen said, his voice shaking, but filled with a stubborn courage that Audrey admired. "And she loves me. We cannot pretend otherwise any longer." Caspian stepped forward, his cold voice cutting through the rising argument with absolute authority. "Lord Finch, please lower your voice," the king said calmly, looking at the terrified guests behind them. "Let us move this discussion into the library immediately, so we can resolve this matter without destroying your daughter's name in front of the entire valley." They walked back to the house in a tense, angry silence, the heavy wooden doors of the library closing behind them to leave only the family, Owen and Lady Eleanor, inside the spacious room. "This is an absolute outrage, Mr. Finch shouted, turning on Lily with a look of pure betrayal. "You have ruined your future, and you have insulted the king after everything we did to secure this match." Lily lifted her chin, looking directly into her father's eyes with a strength she had never shown before. "I will not marry a man I do not love, father," she said clearly. "I have tried to be the perfect daughter, but I will not spend the rest of my life living a lie just to satisfy your social ambitions. Caspian deserves a wife who loves him completely, and my heart belongs to Owen." Caspian stepped between them, his white hair catching the firelight as he looked down at the angry older man. "Your daughter is right, Lord Finch," Caspian said smoothly. "These past 2 months have shown us both that we lack the foundation for a successful marriage. I will not force a woman into my home when her heart is elsewhere. I am releasing Lily from our arrangement with my full blessing, and I expect you to respect her choice if you value my continued friendship in this valley." Mr. Finch deflated slightly, realizing he could not argue with the powerful king without losing everything. Before her father could speak another word, Caspian turned his gaze toward Audrey, who was standing quietly near the bookshelf. "However, Lord Finch," Caspian continued, his voice dropping to a low, intense tone that filled the room, "during my time with your family, I have discovered that my true compatibility lies with your younger daughter. I am asking for your permission to court Miss Audrey properly, with the full intention of making her my queen when the social season begins." The room erupted into a fresh wave of shock, Mr. Finch staring at the white-haired king in utter disbelief, while Audrey's mother gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "This is complete insanity," Mr. Finch muttered, looking between Audrey and Caspian as if searching for a hidden trick. "You reject my eldest daughter for her improper behavior, and now you want to take the younger one, who has done nothing but argue with you since the day you met?" Caspian smiled, a genuine look of affection passing over his pale face as he looked at Audrey. "I do not need another perfectly behaved lady to manage my household, Lord Finch," Caspian said quietly. "I need someone who challenges me, who makes me think, and who brings life into this cold house. Audrey is the only woman who has ever done that, and I will court her with or without your blessing." Realizing that refusing the king would mean a total loss of his family's influence and a public scandal he could not recover from, Mr. Finch finally closed his eyes, letting out a long, defeated sigh. "Very well," he muttered, shaking his head. "If you are both determined to go through with this madness, I will not stand in your way. But there will be a proper 3-month courtship in the town before any wedding takes place, to ensure that this is truly what you both want." Audrey stepped forward, her hand finding Caspian's cool fingers and holding them tightly as a deep sense of relief washed over her. 18 months later, Audrey stood by the tall window of the Pinecrest Library, watching the golden autumn sunset cast long shadows across the valley. She had adapted to her life as the Queen of Gale Valley in her own unique way, refusing to follow the rigid social rules that other women prized, but managing the vast estate with a sharp competence that earned her the respect of the local families. Lily and Owen were happily married, living in a beautiful house near the Southern River, where Owen's business was thriving with the king's quiet support. Their lives finally filled with the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. Audrey heard a familiar, quiet footstep behind her and turned around to see Caspian entering the room, his white hair catching the warm light of the fading sun as he wrapped his arms around her waist, his chest solid and warm against her back. "What are you thinking about so deeply, my love?" he whispered, resting his chin on her shoulder. Audrey smiled, leaning back against him and looking out at the endless pine trees that surrounded their home. She felt a deep, quiet gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment, realizing that the future they had built together was worth every single risk they had taken to achieve it. The dark valley stretched out before them, silent and vast, but inside the stone mansion, the rooms were filled with warmth and the steady rhythm of a shared life. It was a strange truth that the paths we fear the most are often the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be, stripping away the old expectations to reveal the real strength hidden beneath our doubts. True love did not require a perfect alignment of circumstances or the approval of a quiet world. It simply demanded the courage to speak the truth when silence was the easier choice, and to hold on to each other when the storm began to rise. Looking into the darkening woods, Audrey knew that the structures of society would always remain rigid and demanding, but they no longer carried the power to define her choices or limit her happiness. They had carved out a space of their own making in this wild territory, built on honesty and a quiet refusal to settle for a life of convenient shadows. Caspian squeezed her hand, his fingers no longer feeling cold to her touch, but familiar and steady as the deep roots of the pines outside. The future was an unwritten territory, filled with the challenges of managing a kingdom and the endless adjustments of two different worlds learning to live as one. But she faced it with a calm heart, They had chosen each other against every expectation, proving that even in the coldest corners of the world, a spirited heart could find its true home.